When God speaks, it is rarely in the way we expect. Sometimes His voice thunders through circumstances, shaking us to our core. Other times, it is a whisper that unsettles us because of its quiet authority. And there are moments when His communication feels utterly strange, so unusual that we hesitate to trust it, wondering if we've misunderstood. But in those moments lies something profound, God's ability to pierce through the clutter of our own reasoning and place before us a truth we cannot ignore. The experience of receiving a strange warning from God is one that leaves an imprint not just on the mind, but on the soul. It is not merely information, it is transformation. You see, the human mind craves clarity and order. We want God to explain Himself in neat sentences, in ways that satisfy our logic and align with our expectations. Yet God's methods often defy those boundaries. Why? Because if His messages were always obvious and ordinary, we might dismiss them, treat them as background noise, or reduce them to intellectual curiosities. Instead, when He chooses to deliver something unusual, something that disrupts our usual way of thinking, it forces us to stop, to wrestle, and to ask deeper questions. That strangeness becomes the very thing that captures our attention. Consider the prophets of old. Ezekiel was instructed to lie on his side for over a year to symbolize Israel's captivity. Hosea was told to marry a woman unfaithful to him, a living parable of God's covenant love. To the casual observer, these were bizarre, even troubling instructions. But to those with ears to hear, they revealed dimensions of God's truth that no ordinary message could convey. What appeared strange on the surface carried a weight that shook nations and redirected history. So when God delivers a strange warning today, it is not out of randomness. It is because He knows the unusual has the power to awaken us in ways the ordinary never could. Psychologically, this makes sense. The human mind is wired to notice what is different, what doesn't fit the pattern. Our attention sharpens when confronted with the unexpected. Spiritually, God uses this very design to break through our complacency. A dream that unsettles us, a phrase that echoes in our mind, an encounter that seems too coincidental to dismiss. All of these can be divine intrusions into our otherwise predictable routines. They may feel strange, even uncomfortable, but they carry the fingerprints of God's intentionality. The real question, then, is not whether God's warning is strange, but whether we will humble ourselves enough to listen. Too often we rationalize it away. We say, that was just my imagination, or that doesn't make sense, so it can't be from God. Yet faith calls us to trust that God's ways are higher than ours, and His methods often stretch us beyond the borders of our reason. Strange warnings are not given to confuse us, they are given to awaken us. And when that warning comes, when it grips your heart in a way that logic cannot explain, it demands a response. Ignoring it is easy. Obeying it is costly. But the cost of ignoring God is always greater than the cost of obedience. A strange warning from God is like a flashing light in the darkness. It may not explain everything, but it makes one truth undeniable: danger is ahead, and preparation is required. So the moment you sense that God is speaking in a way that feels unfamiliar, don't dismiss it. Don't rush to explain it away. Instead, lean in, pray, and ask God for discernment, because what feels strange to you may be the very thing God uses to save you, to redirect you, or to prepare you for what is coming. A strange warning may be unsettling, but it is also an act of divine love. When God interrupts your life with something that doesn't fit your expectations, take it seriously. The oddness of the message is often what makes it urgent, and perhaps that is the point. What shapes you. When we encounter the strange workings of God, our first reaction is often confusion. We wonder, why would God choose to communicate this way? Why not something simpler, something clearer? Yet, what feels strange to us is never strange to God. He operates on a higher plane of wisdom, where every detail has purpose, every moment carries weight, and every act is woven into a larger design we cannot yet see. The unusual nature of His warnings is not meant to disorient us, but to call us deeper, to lift us out of the shallow waters of assumption and into the vast ocean of His truth. Think about it. The very essence of faith requires us to step beyond what is comfortable, predictable, and rational. If God always acted within the bounds of our logic, then faith would not be necessary. But faith thrives precisely in those moments when God's ways appear mysterious. That strangeness is what forces us to lean not on our own understanding, but on His. The Bible tells us plainly, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." And so when a divine message comes wrapped in mystery, it is not a mistake, it is an invitation to trust. History gives us countless examples. Joseph received dreams that made no sense to him at first. How could bowing sheaves or celestial bodies possibly relate to his future? Yet, those dreams carried a meaning that would only become clear years later, when famine struck and nations were saved through his leadership. Ezekiel's visions were filled with wheels within wheels, creatures with multiple faces, and images so bizarre that even scholars today wrestle to interpret them. And then there is John, exiled on Patmos, recording a revelation of beasts, seals, and trumpets that has puzzled humanity for centuries. Strange, absolutely meaningless, not for a moment. What these examples reveal is that God's strangeness always carries intentionality. It is never randomness. The human mind struggles with ambiguity because we equate clarity with control. We want to know, to predict, to plan. But God disrupts that pattern to remind us that He is the author, not us. Philosophically, this is humbling. It forces us to recognize the limits of human reasoning in the face of divine sovereignty. Psychologically, it awakens us because the unusual has a way of commanding attention in ways the ordinary never could. The truth is, what appears strange may actually be the most merciful form of communication. When God warns us in ways that unsettle us, it is because He refuses to let us remain spiritually numb. A strange dream may disturb our sleep, but it also disturbs our complacency. A sudden conviction may confuse us, but it also prevents us from walking blindly into disaster. The very thing that feels odd is the very thing that carries God's protective hand. And here is the challenge: are we willing to embrace God's strange ways as sacred, rather than dismissing them as senseless? Too many people reject divine warnings because they do not fit within their framework of what seems reasonable. Yet God has never asked us to measure His truth by our convenience. He asks us to receive it by faith, trusting that His strange methods are always anchored in eternal wisdom. So when God's message arrives in a form that unsettles you, do not turn away, lean in. Ask what it means. Search the Scriptures. Pray for discernment. Because often the very strangeness of God's method is proof that it is not of human origin. It is His fingerprint, His signature, His way of saying, "This is not from you, this is from me." What seems strange in the moment may prove, in hindsight, to be the most profound act of grace you ever received. God's strangeness is never empty, it is always full of meaning. And perhaps the question we should ask is not, why does God speak this way? But, am I willing to listen when He does? One of the great tragedies of our age is that God is still speaking, but people are no longer listening. We live in a world saturated with noise. Voices from media, opinions from friends, pressures from culture. And in that noise, the still, small voice of God can easily be overlooked. What makes it even more sobering is that many of His warnings don't come wrapped in lightning or thunder, but in subtle signals, in gentle proddings, in those strange moments that cause us to pause. And yet, because they seem small, because they feel unusual, we dismiss them. We shrug them off as coincidence, imagination, or unnecessary fear. But here's the danger: when we ignore the little signs of God, we set ourselves up to be blindsided by the larger events they were meant to prepare us for. If you think about it, this is not just a spiritual truth, but a psychological one. Human beings are experts at ignoring early warnings. We ignore the doctor's advice until the diagnosis becomes severe. We dismiss financial red flags until the debt is overwhelming. We avoid relational conflicts until the bond is broken beyond repair. And then, when the collapse comes, we wonder why. The truth is, the collapse rarely comes without a warning. We just weren't paying attention. Spiritually, the same principle applies. God in His mercy often gives us signals before the storm. A strange dream, an inner conviction, a scripture that seems to glow with urgency. These are not accidents. They are warnings. And the urgency lies not in how grand they appear, but in the fact that they are given at all. Throughout Scripture, God has always spoken in ways that required attentiveness. Noah didn't see the flood when God told him to build the ark. Lot didn't see fire falling when the angels urged him to leave the city. The disciples didn't fully understand Christ's warnings until after his resurrection. But in each case, the urgency of the warning was real, even if the fulfillment wasn't yet visible. That is why paying attention is a matter of life and death, both physically and spiritually. Ignoring a divine warning doesn't change the reality of what's coming. It only changes whether we are prepared for it. This is where the strangeness of God's methods comes into play. Because warnings often come in unusual ways, they test our willingness to take them seriously. They expose whether our faith is built on comfort or on trust. It's easy to obey God when His direction aligns with our expectations. It's far harder when His message unsettles us, when it doesn't make sense, when it interrupts the normal flow of life. But that is precisely why the warning matters. It is not meant to fit into our plans, it is meant to redirect them. There is also a deeper, philosophical dimension here. To ignore a warning is, in essence, to place ourselves above God. It is to say, I know better. My judgment is more reliable than yours. That is the arrogance of human pride, and it is the same pride that led Israel to ignore the prophets, that led entire civilizations to collapse under the weight of their own stubbornness. History is filled with the ruins of people who refuse to listen. And if we are not careful, we can join them, not because God failed to warn us, but because we failed to take Him seriously. So let me ask you directly, what has God been whispering into your life that you've been ignoring? What subtle warning, what uncomfortable conviction, what strange stirring in your heart have you explained away? It may not look urgent now, but that is the nature of warnings. They are about tomorrow, not today. Their urgency lies in preparation, not in panic. And when God calls you to pay attention, it is always an act of mercy, never of cruelty. A warning ignored becomes a judgment received, but a warning heeded becomes a blessing preserved. The choice is always ours. Will we dismiss what feels small and strange, or will we recognize it as God's urgent call to prepare? When God issues a warning, it is never meant to leave us trembling in fear without direction. Fear is not His ultimate goal, preparation is. His warnings point toward future events, not to paralyze us but to position us. They are not meant to keep us staring anxiously at the horizon, but to anchor us in faith so that when the storm comes, we are not swept away. And this is where many misunderstand God's methods. They hear a strange warning and immediately think the worst, as if God's intent is to terrify them into obedience. But biblically, God's pattern has always been one of mercy. He alerts His people so they can be ready, so that they can stand, so that they can endure. Think about Noah. The flood was not a surprise judgment, it was a revealed one. God told Noah in advance, giving him time to build the ark. It took years, perhaps decades, but during all that time, Noah's task was clear: prepare. Now, the people around him mocked, laughed, and doubted because they could not see what Noah had been warned about. But the strange warning became the dividing line between those who perished and the one family that was preserved. Preparation was the key, not panic. This same principle applies to us. When God reveals something unsettling about the future, whether through His word, through a stirring in the Spirit, or through circumstances that jolt us awake, it is never to keep us in a constant state of dread. It is to reorient our lives. It is to make us evaluate how we are living, what we are trusting, and where our priorities lie. A warning about the future is really a call to spiritual inventory. Am I ready for what's ahead? Am I building my life on foundations that can withstand the shaking? Or am I living so carelessly that the smallest storm could undo me? Psychologically, this is where the true power of a warning lies. Human beings often operate in the illusion of control, thinking tomorrow will always look like today. But God disrupts that illusion. He reminds us that life is fragile, time is fleeting, and the world itself is moving toward His appointed purposes. This disruption is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also liberating, because once we see reality for what it is, we can live with greater intentionality. Warnings break our attachment to the temporary and redirect us toward the eternal. Philosophically, the issue comes down to how we interpret divine love. A parent who sees danger ahead and warns their child is not being cruel, they are being protective. God operates the same way. His strange warnings about the future are not a form of divine harshness, they are expressions of divine care. If He were indifferent, He would say nothing. If He wanted us destroyed, He would let us walk blindly into disaster. But He speaks, He warns, and He unsettles us precisely because He wants us to be ready. So what should preparedness look like? It is not about building a bunker or stockpiling supplies, though there may be practical wisdom in stewardship. The deeper preparedness God calls for is spiritual. It is about fortifying your faith, strengthening your prayer life, grounding yourself in His Word, and living with a sense of urgency that refuses to waste time on what does not matter. Because the truth is, when the future unfolds, material preparation will only go so far. Spiritual preparedness is what secures peace when everything else shakes. God warns not to frighten us, but to form us. He warns not to bind us in fear, but to free us from illusion. And if His warning seems strange, it is only because His perspective stretches far beyond our own. He sees what is ahead, and in His mercy, He calls us to be ready. The real question is not, will the future bring difficulty? Because it will. The real question is, will I be prepared when it does? When God issues a warning, it is never without a purpose. His intention is not to leave us confused or overwhelmed, but to protect us. Every warning is an act of grace, a signal that danger is ahead, but also that safety is possible. Yet protection is not automatic, it is tied to our response. The safeguard of God's warnings comes only when we obey. Ignoring them leaves us exposed, but following them places us under the shelter of His hand. Noah understood this truth better than most. God warned him of a flood unlike anything the world had ever seen. But that warning alone would not have saved him. It was Noah's obedience that made the difference. He built the ark despite ridicule, despite decades of waiting, despite never having seen rain before. His protection was not in the knowledge of the flood, but in the obedience that flowed from his faith. The same applies to us. It is not enough to hear God's voice. We must act on it. This is where obedience becomes the dividing line between safety and destruction. Psychologically, human beings often prefer knowledge without responsibility. We want insight without obligation. But divine warnings are never given for curiosity, they are given for action. When God disturbs your spirit with a message that feels strange or urgent, He is not simply informing you. He is inviting you into obedience that will lead to protection. To ignore that call is to gamble with consequences that can be devastating. Philosophically, this raises the question of freedom and responsibility. God respects our freedom. He does not force obedience. But with that freedom comes accountability. A warning unheeded becomes a judgment accepted. To say no to God's instruction is to say yes to whatever outcome He was trying to spare us from. It is sobering to realize that many of the wounds we carry in life were not inevitable. They were the result of ignoring signals God had already placed in our path. The strange warning I received reminded me that God's love is not sentimental, it is protective. And protection often requires direction that may feel uncomfortable. Sometimes obedience means walking away from an opportunity that looks attractive but carries hidden danger. Sometimes it means changing habits, ending relationships, or altering plans that we thought were secure. Obedience rarely feels convenient, but it always proves wise in the long run. And the longer we walk with God, the more we learn that His strange instructions often lead to the safest places. What makes this so difficult is that obedience usually requires trust in what we cannot see. We obey before the danger arrives, not after. We trust the warning because we trust the one who gave it. That is the heart of faith, believing that God's perspective is wider than ours, that His vision stretches further than our limited horizon. Obedience becomes an act of surrender, a declaration that His wisdom is greater than our understanding. So I ask you, what has God warned you about that you have yet to obey? Has He been nudging you to let go of something destructive, to prepare for something ahead, or to return to Him in repentance? The warning itself is a mercy, but the protection lies in your response. Do not mistake awareness for safety. It is not what you know that will shield you. It is what you do with what God has told you. God's strange warnings are never meant to frighten us, but to protect us. And that protection becomes real only when we align our steps with His voice. Obedience is the bridge between the warning and the safety it promises. The question is simple: will you walk across it? There is a reason the Bible repeats the command to watch and pray. God knows how easily we drift into spiritual sleep. Life has a way of numbing us. Routine dulls our senses. Business distracts our hearts, and comfort lulls us into complacency. And yet, the very warnings God gives are reminders that sleep is dangerous. To be spiritually asleep is to be unprepared. To be spiritually awake is to be ready, discerning, and steady, no matter what the future holds. Strange warnings from God are like alarms in the night. They are jarring, unsettling, and disruptive, but that is exactly what makes them necessary. You do not set an alarm to soothe you, you set an alarm to wake you. And when it goes off, ignoring it is a choice, but it is a costly one. Spiritually, God uses strange messages, unusual stirrings, and unexpected moments to awaken His people. He does this because He knows the times we are living in demand vigilance. The world is moving quickly, morally and spiritually unraveling, and those who are not awake will be swept along without even realizing it. Psychologically, we understand that awareness is the first step toward change. A person who is unaware of danger cannot prepare for it. In the same way, God calls His people to cultivate awareness, to live in such a way that they are not surprised by the shifting tides of culture, by the pressures of temptation, or by the trials that inevitably come. Staying spiritually awake means we live with our eyes open, our hearts guarded, and our spirits attuned to the voice of God. It means we resist the temptation to drift with the crowd and instead remain rooted in His truth. Philosophically, this idea of wakefulness carries profound weight. To be awake spiritually is to see reality as it truly is, not as we wish it to be. Most people live in illusions of control, illusions of permanence, illusions of endless time. But God, in His mercy, shatters those illusions through His word and His warnings. He reminds us that time is short, eternity is real, and life is not a rehearsal but a preparation for what is to come. Being awake means we live not just for the moment, but with the awareness that every choice echoes into eternity. The strange warning I received was not only about what might happen in the future, it was also about the danger of being unprepared when it arrives. It was a call to vigilance, to sharpen my faith, and to refuse the sleep of complacency. And I believe that same call is for you, because the greatest threat we face is not what is happening in the world around us. It is what is happening in our hearts when we stop paying attention. So how do we remain awake? By keeping close to God in prayer, by filling our minds with His word, by staying alert to the Spirit's prompting, and by refusing to grow dull in the face of comfort or distraction. Just as a watchman on the wall stays focused through the long hours of the night, so must we stay attentive, knowing that the moment we let down our guard is the moment the enemy advances. Wakefulness is not passive, it is active. It requires discipline, focus, and commitment. God's strange warnings are not only messages about what is to come, they are tests of whether we are awake enough to hear Him now. And if we are awake, then we are ready. If we are awake, we will not be shaken. If we are awake, we will not be caught off guard. The future will belong to those who stay spiritually awake. The question is not whether God is speaking. The question is whether we are listening.